The cold skies over Canada had always carried a certain silence, a silence broken only by the roar of jets cutting through the icy air. But this time, the silence felt different, as if the heavens themselves were waiting for a revelation. Far away, across the Atlantic, a single fighter jet was preparing to cross into history, a jet that would expose Canada's hidden vulnerability to the entire world. Its name was Gripen E. For years, Canada's Air Force had been balancing on a fragile edge. Politicians made promises, contracts were delayed, and outdated aircraft were forced to fly longer than they were ever meant to. The CF-18 Hornets, once symbols of strength, had grown old, their wings tired, their technology decades behind the world's leading powers. Every time they took to the skies, it was as though Canada's pilots carried not only the weight of their mission, but also the burden of a system that had failed them. Behind closed doors, officials whispered of accidents narrowly avoided, of spare parts scavenged from grounded aircraft, and of secret reports warning that Canada's defenses were not ready for the challenges of the modern age. Then came Sweden's Gripen E, sleek, sharp, and terrifying in its simplicity. Unlike the heavy, over-engineered giants of the United States or Russia, the Gripen was born from necessity. It was a predator designed to fight against overwhelming odds, to survive in the harshest environments, and to outthink enemies with technology rather than brute force. And when Canada allowed the Gripen into its trials, something happened that no one in Ottawa expected. The Gripen E revealed the disaster Canada had been hiding for years. The test flights began quietly. Few people outside defense circles even knew they were happening. But in the skies over the frozen north, Canada's old Hornets were pushed into mock battles with the Gripen. The outcome was brutal. Time and time again, the Gripen locked onto them before they even knew it was there. Its radar pierced through the cold mist. Its electronic warfare systems blinded the Hornets' sensors, and its agility left Canada's pilots feeling as though they were flying relics from another era. The Gripen was not just outperforming them, it was humiliating them. And the stories began to leak. One pilot, his face pale after a simulated engagement, was overheard muttering that it was like bringing a knife to a gunfight. Another compared the Gripen's data-sharing network to a ghost in the sky, coordinating attacks that the Hornets couldn't even comprehend. Each report, each whisper, painted the same chilling picture. Canada's Air Force, proud but neglected, was crumbling in the face of modern air combat. Behind the scenes, a storm brewed. Documents marked classified carried warnings that Canada's ability to defend its own airspace was slipping through its fingers. Allies began to take notice. In Washington, there were smirks. Canada had long relied on the protective shadow of the United States. But in Moscow, there were raised eyebrows, for a weak Canada meant opportunities in the Arctic. And in Stockholm, there was silence, the kind of silence that comes when you know a truth too dangerous to shout aloud. But the Gripen E's exposure was not just about machines, it was about people. Canadian pilots, some of the best trained in the world, found themselves demoralized. They fought valiantly in every exercise, pushing their Hornets beyond their limits. Yet the results were always the same. The Gripen saw them before they saw it. It struck them before they could react. It was as if the jet itself was mocking the years of delay, indecision, and political games that had left Canada vulnerable. Rumors spread through the halls of the Canadian government. Some wanted to bury the results, to keep the disaster hidden from public eyes. Others demanded immediate action, a complete overhaul of procurement strategies, a desperate bid to save the reputation of the Royal Canadian Air Force. But it was too late. The truth was seeping out, faster than anyone could contain it. Journalists caught whispers of the failed trials. Analysts began piecing together fragments of information. And somewhere, in the icy night sky, the Gripen E kept flying, a silent judge passing its verdict on a nation unprepared for the wars of tomorrow. The question was no longer whether Canada needed a new fighter jet. The question was whether it was already too late. For in the game of air superiority, delays are deadly and disasters are unforgiving. The Gripen E had not just exposed Canada's weakness, it had revealed it to the world. And once the world knows a secret, it cannot be taken back. As the snow fell over Ottawa, a single phrase echoed through the corridors of power. Disaster. A disaster that could no longer be hidden, because it was now written in the skies themselves. The storm that began in whispers soon became a roar. What had started as quiet murmurs among pilots turned into a firestorm of speculation that stretched across borders. International defense circles were buzzing, asking the same question. How could a nation like Canada, with its vast territory and crucial role in NATO, allow its air force to sink so deeply into crisis? The Gripen E had not just beaten the Hornets in mock battles, it had pulled the curtain back on a truth Canada desperately wanted hidden. In Europe, analysts pored over leaked performance reports. One Swedish engineer, who had worked on the Gripen's avionics, was quoted saying that the Canadian results didn't surprise him at all. The Gripen E was built for nations exactly like Canada, he said. Harsh climates, long distances, and enemies that never fight fair. The tragedy is not that the Gripen won, it's that Canada waited so long to face this truth. His words spread like wildfire, fueling debates in Ottawa and Washington alike. Canadian politicians scrambled. Some insisted the leaks were exaggerated, part of a campaign by Sweden to sell jets. Others admitted privately that the problem ran deeper than procurement. The disaster was systemic. Years of political hesitation, the obsession with alliances, and the assumption that America's shadow would always be enough to shield Canadian skies. But in the modern world, where threats could appear in seconds and missiles could be launched from beyond the horizon, shadows were no longer protection. They were traps. The Gripen E, meanwhile, became a symbol. In military circles, it was praised as the fighter that exposed a great lie, that Canada's air defenses were strong enough to stand alone. Every journalist who touched the story described the same chilling imagery. Canada's mighty skies reduced to vulnerability, its pilots flying into battles they could never win. The Air Force, once proud of its tradition, now felt like a relic locked in a dangerous present. And yet, the exposure went beyond Canada's borders. Allies began to worry. If Canada's northern shield was cracked, what did that mean for the Arctic routes opening as the ice melted? Russia had already stationed advanced Su-35s and radar systems in its Arctic bases. If Canada couldn't defend its skies, then NATO's northern flank was exposed. Suddenly, the disaster was not just Canadian. It was global. The Gripen's shadow stretched far wider than anyone expected. In military forums, anonymous insiders whispered of shocking simulations, scenarios where Russian bombers crossed into Canadian airspace met little resistance, where aging Hornets failed to intercept in time, where Allied forces had to step in because Canada's defense was too slow, too fragile. Each scenario painted the same picture. Canada had become the weakest link in the chain, a vulnerability enemies could exploit at will. The Gripen's demonstration hadn't created the disaster. It had illuminated it. The most haunting part was how simple the Gripen made it look. Pilots described it like a ghost, appearing suddenly on their sensors, vanishing, then reappearing behind them with a missile lock. Its electronic warfare suite was like a magician's trick, twisting signals, feeding false information, making old radars believe the sky was empty even as danger closed in. Against the Gripen, Canada's Hornets weren't just outdated, they were blind. Within the Canadian forces, morale plummeted. Some pilots questioned whether they were being sent into the sky with weapons of another era. Others fought to stay optimistic, reminding themselves of their skills and training. But the truth lingered in every hangar, every briefing room. Skill alone could not erase decades of political neglect. And as long as the Hornets kept flying, every sortie was a gamble against fate. Meanwhile, the world was watching. Russia studied the reports with cold satisfaction. China, too, noted the weakness of a NATO ally across the Pacific. Even America, though bound by alliance, understood that a crippled Canadian Air Force meant heavier burdens for their own pilots. Canada, for so long the quiet partner, had suddenly become the center of unwanted attention. And all because one jet, born in Sweden, had dared to reveal the truth. In the halls of Ottawa, the debate raged on. Should Canada rush to replace its fleet? Should it gamble billions on American promises of the F-35, or take the shocking path of embracing the Swedish Gripen? Every answer seemed wrapped in risk, but behind each argument, one fact could not be denied. The disaster was real. The Gripen E had not invented Canada's weakness. It had only exposed it, laid it bare before the world like a wound that could no longer be hidden. And as the cold wind swept across the northern skies, Canadian pilots continued to fly their weary Hornets, knowing that each mission was a reminder of what the world had already seen. The disaster was no longer a secret.